This video is looking at a short extract from A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, and it's looking at the moment where Scrooge, having spent the evening with the ghost of Christmas present, is challenged by the ghost just before Christmas comes to an end for that year and the ghost disappears. And Scrooge is challenged by the appearance of the two children of mankind. And we're going to have a look at how Dickens handles that moment. Now, I've given you quite a general question. So how does Dickens use language, form and structure to present this moment effectively? But what we're in fact going to do is go through and make sure we understand all of the extract, and then to pick out certain choices that Dickens has made in that presentation that you could write about if you were doing an extract question on this section of the text. So we have in the first couple of paragraphs, Scrooge noticing that there's something sticking out of the Ghost of Christmas Present's robes. So if you imagine the Ghost of Christmas Present, if you've been studying the rest of the text, we know that he's wearing this kind of lush sort of green coat. It's not unlike a kind of big, long Father Christmas coat, but in green. Okay, if you want to see what it looks like, then Google Ghost of Christmas Present and hit images, and you'll see a lot of different people's interpretations of how the Ghost of Christmas Present looks. But we can see that Scrooge notices that there is something protruding from his skirts. And this doesn't mean he's in a dress. It means that he's got kind of big, long robes kind of around his legs. And Scrooge can see something that he thinks may be a foot, maybe a claw. And the spirit replies, I'm basically going to paraphrase this so we can check that you understand the meaning of it. The spirit replies that, well, it could be a claw, there's flesh upon it, but the spirit sounds kind of upset when he's saying, you know, look at it. And then all of a sudden, from the foldings of these robes, two children appear, and we have this list of negative adjectives to describe them. And the children are kneeling down, clinging onto the ghost's robes. And at this point, the ghost kind of changes his tone slightly and says, oh man, look here, look down here, exclaimed the ghost. And we'll talk about why there's that change to man in a moment. And the description of the children says that we have a boy and a girl. And again, we get another list of all of these features of them. And they're prostrate in their humility. So humility is when you don't think you're very good, like you're not overly proud, you're quite humble, you're sort of, presenting yourself as being submissive a little bit. And the next paragraph of description compares what they should look like to what they actually do look like. So you get a lot of description of, there should be graceful youth filling out their faces. They should be, experiencing these freshest tints, but instead a stale and shriveled hands are kind of dried up and withered, had pinched and twisted them, pulled them into shreds. The angels should have been on their thrones in their faces, but instead devils glare out menacingly. All of these things, no degradation, no awful things, through all of creation had monsters half so horrible. So these children, despite the fact that they are children, are really in a bad way. They should be all lovely and innocent and fresh looking, but instead they're kind of suspicious. They're like devils. They're kind of glaring out. And Scrooge jumps back. If you start back, you jump back appalled, so horrified. And he tries to do the polite thing. He tries to say, what beautiful children there are, but the words choke him. He finds that he can't lie. This would be a lie of such enormous magnitude, of such kind of huge depth, huge extent. And the only thing he can ask is, Spirit, are they yours? And the ghost says, they are man's, so they are mankind's. And they cling to me. So these two children kind of desperately take hold of Christmas. The boy is ignorance, the girl is want. So if you are ignorant, you don't know things, but it's because you've kind of actively closed your mind to them. You don't know what you should know. Either you're choosing to ignore it or you're choosing not to learn or find out. And the girl is want. So the girl is kind of need, poverty, deprivation. And the ghost warns Scrooge to beware them both and all of their degree and everything like them, but most of all, beware the boy. So out of the two, it's the boy. It's this idea of closing your mind that is the most dangerous, because on his face is written doom, is written judgment, unless the writing be erased. Right? And the ghost kind of challenges Scrooge to, deny it, because he's telling Scrooge basically that ignorance, Scrooge's own ignorance, is going to lead to doom, is going to lead to his judgment, unless he does something to change the future. And this challenge to Scrooge, deny it, slander those who tell ye, admit for your factious purposes and make it worse, and abide the end. This is a kind of, change. You've got to do something about it. And Scrooge asks, have they no refuge or resource? Is there no one or nothing that can help them? And the spirit turns on him with his own words. Okay, he says, are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? And you'll remember from the first stave that this was Scrooge's kind of dismissal of the charity collectors, of the portly gentlemen. He said, I don't want to help. I don't want to give to charity. I don't want to kind of them having my money. They should be in prisons and workhouses. And then the bell strikes midnight. Scrooge looks around for the ghost and sees the ghost has disappeared, and remembers what Marley's said just before he sees the next ghost, which is going to be the ghost of Christmas yet to come. So looking through, now we've checked the meaning, what we're trying to do is to pick out some of these methods that Dickens is using to present Scrooge, or to make this moment effective, to give it impact, right? And the first thing that gives this moment sort of impact is that Scrooge is considerably more polite and respectful than he has been earlier. So we can see that Scrooge is maybe beginning to change because of this kind of less confrontational question. Okay, so methods-wise, you'd be talking about the question. You'd be making the point that it is less confrontational. If you confront somebody, you directly and more aggressively challenge them. And he's noticing things that are around him. He hasn't really cared about anyone else before, but now he's noticing things around him. And the style in which the ghost answers him is beginning to change. So we can talk about the fact that Dickens has the ghost speaking in a much more archaic, right? That means old-fashioned style. Okay, this is much more almost religious. Okay, and it has a kind of air of judgment to it. It's almost biblical. That is not how you do a good bee. Let me do that again. It's almost biblical in its style. Okay, so the spirit is kind of sorrowful, and he uses this imperative here to guide Scrooge's attention to these children. And you have the contrast between what should be the connotations of children, which should be kind of young and happy and innocent and playful and active. And instead, we have this listing that these children are wretched. So they're kind of condemned. They seem to be cursed. They've got really bad fortune. Abject, they're kind of abandoned, desolate, frightful, hideous, miserable. And this listing is overwhelming the reader with the kind of bad things, the negative things, the pitiful state of the children. The idea that they cling, they clung, that they knelt down. These are kind of children who are in this kind of position of begging. They need help desperately. And the ghost's reference to "oh man" here uses Scrooge as representing mankind, right? So it's no longer kind of, look, Scrooge, look at this. It's extending it out to look, everybody. And we get this repetition of this command, this imperative, look, because Scrooge is beginning to see, both literally and metaphorically, for the first time, what the consequences of his actions are being. Okay, he's already been taken to the Cratchit's house where he's seen Tiny Tim, and he's kind of, started to think that Tiny Tim might die unless something changes, or Tiny Tim will die unless something changes. But here the whole point is that Dickens is humanizing, okay, giving kind of a human face to what Scrooge is doing. And by referring to Scrooge as man, it's not just Scrooge, it's everyone. So Dickens is kind of challenging you as readers with the consequences of your actions. These children and Scrooge become symbolic. So we have the boy and a girl. We get another list here with the same kind of idea as before. So you might want to do a paragraph that says Dickens repeatedly uses listing to describe the children in order to create. Meager means there's not very much, there's very little. Okay? And they're almost described in animal terms, animalistic. Okay, this wolfish kind of links to the claw earlier. These are children who were in such a bad state that they're kind of like animals. And they're prostrate in their humility, but they going back to this idea of begging again, they really kind of need help. And then we have the contrast here repeatedly between what they are and what they should be. And we have kind of language pinched, twisted, pulled into shreds, stale, shriveled. We have language taken from the semantic field, okay, semantic to do with words, field to do with a particular area of poverty and need. Okay, these are impoverished. Okay, if you are impoverished, you are subject to poverty, impoverished children. And again, these verbs are kind of violent and unpleasant. We have the kind of biblical references, they should be angels, but they've become devils, the way that they have been treated, and, nothing throughout all of creation has made monsters half so horrible and dread. And Scrooge finds that this has a physical impact on him. The words choked themselves, this metaphor there, shows how difficult he finds it. And language becomes inadequate. Okay? If something is inadequate, it can't do the job. You've not got enough of it. It's not able to do it. So language is inadequate to describe what he's feeling. And just in case we hadn't understood it, the Spirit explains their symbolic value. These children are personifications of these two problems, ignorance and want. And this warning is both to Scrooge and to the readers, okay, that actually, don't be ignorant because it leads to these awful consequences. Don't ignore poverty, ignore want, because actually, if you do, you will face doom, you will face judgment. And this language takes on a decidedly biblical, judgmental tone. Scrooge is being warned in no uncertain terms that his behavior has not been Christian and he needs to change. And Scrooge, kind of as a structure point, kind of questions what can be done to help. This is a more human, a more generous approach. And this, we said before, refers back to stave one. It's the repetition here of Scrooge's own words shows how harsh and shows how brutal his previous attitudes have been. To say, can't anyone help them? We'll send them to prison, put them in a workhouse, right? So here Scrooge is realizing how awful his attitude's been. And Dickens is using the ghost to repeat, to quote Scrooge's own dialogue at him, to allow him to realize the insensitivity, the brutality of his earlier position. And here we get the kind of linking through the ghosts. The ghost of Christmas Present disappears because Christmas is finished. He remembers Marley. He remembers his own, threat of being chained up for eternity. And he looks up to see the next ghost, a solemn phantom, who is actually, to all intents and purposes, dressed as the kind of traditional depiction of death coming towards him. So this moment is important because we've got this kind of shift from sort of a more kind of natural style to a more symbolic, a more religious, a more judgmental tone. We've got the personifications of ignorance and want. We've got the way that they're described, the use of contrast and listing. And we've got the kind of clues that Scrooge is beginning to realize the weight of everything that's upon him. I hope this helps. Good luck with writing about this extract.